We are starting today with an intensive look at what is often called the greatest mystery in modern aviation history, the 2014 disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. This event, is now a decade old, and it fundamentally challenged everything we thought we knew about tracking and security in the 21st century sky.
It is. It's a profound human tragedy, and it's one that demands our respect and really a continued search for clarity. When we talk about MH370, we're discussing the sudden, absolute vanishing of a Boeing 777-2H6ER. That's registration 9MMRO. It was carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew. That's 239 lives, all presumed lost.
An almost unimaginable number.
It is. And the sheer scale of this loss, compounded by the lack of a definitive wreckage location, it just makes the ongoing need for answers for the families absolutely paramount.
Our analysis today draws upon an incredibly dense stack of sources. We're looking at exhaustive official reports, the findings from multiple international investigation teams, and the highly technical, really unique analysis of the plane's passive satellite communication data.
And our mission here is to analyze the central paradox, how a modern, a 777 aircraft flying in a completely digitally connected world could simply vanish. We'll analyze the sequence of failures, both technological and procedural, and the key competing theories about what happened to the plane.
And crucially, we'll look at what this catastrophe forced the world to learn about aviation tracking and security. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the night of March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 departs Kuala Lumpur International Airport, that's KLIA, at 0.42 Malaysian time. It's heading northeast on a completely routine route to Beijing.
And this was a well-maintained aircraft, a real workhorse of the long-haul fleet. It had just over 53,471 flight hours and 7,526 cycles.
So a very experienced plane.
Very. And preparation for the flight, which was supposed to be about 5 hours, was completely standard. It took on 49,100 kilograms of fuel. Now, that calculated out to an endurance of 7 hours and 31 minutes. And that endurance figure, it becomes chillingly important later on.
Because it's so much longer than the planned flight.
Far exceeded it, yes.
The human factor, of course, is always central. The flight deck was occupied by two highly qualified pilots. The captain was 52-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah. He was a highly respected veteran, just an astonishing 18,365 total flying hours. He was even a type rating examiner for the 777.
And alongside him, you had the 26-year-old first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid. He had 2,763 hours. And for Farik, this was a really significant flight. It was actually his final training flight before he was formally checked out as a fully qualified Boeing 777 first officer.
So from the outside, everything about the operation, from the maintenance records to the crew's qualifications, it all just suggested a completely normal flight.
Perfectly normal.
And the early stages of the flight were indeed completely routine. They climbed to their assigned cruising altitude of flight level 350, so 35,000 feet. Voice analysis later confirmed standard, professional exchanges with air traffic control. And then we get to the final confirmed voice communication. That came at 01.19 and 30 seconds Malaysian time.
It's a phrase that has become infamous in aviation lore.
It really has.
Captain Zahari acknowledged the procedural handoff from Lumpur Radar, which is based in Kuala Lumpur, to Ho Chi Minh Area Control Center in Vietnam. And his words were, "Good night, Malaysian 370.
Just so mundane, so normal. And yet, less than a minute after that seemingly ordinary farewell, the plane performs its vanishing act from conventional radar.
Precisely. At 01.20.31 MYT, so just seconds later, as the plane was crossing the boundary waypoint known as IGARI, the mode S symbol, it just vanished.
And then?
Just 42 seconds after that, at 01.21.13, Flight 370 disappeared entirely from the radar screens of both Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh ACCs. This wasn't, a gradual fade. It was an instantaneous electronic erasure.
For anyone listening, let's just clarify what that instantaneous disappearance really means. It signals the loss of this secondary surveillance radar system.
That's right. Secondary radar, it relies on the aircraft's transponder actively broadcasting a signal. This system, which also includes what's called ADS-B functionality, that's how air traffic controllers get all that crucial identifying data. The plane's flight number, its precise speed.
Which was 471 knots true airspeed at the time.
Exactly. And its altitude, which was FL 350. The fact that the transponder signal just blinked out so abruptly, it strongly suggests it was either intentionally turned off or it suffered a sudden complete power failure across that entire system.
Okay, so this is where the information takes a sharp, startling turn. Literally. The sources confirm that while that secondary radar signal vanished, military primary radar systems.
Mm-hmm.
They continued to track the aircraft. And what they saw was an immediate and, well, a radical deviation from the flight plan.
It was an act of non-compliance. It was clear and it was deliberate. Primary radar, unlike secondary, it doesn't rely on the aircraft transmitting anything. It's simply detecting a large metal object in the sky.
Just bouncing a signal off.
Yes, bouncing a signal.
Yeah.
And the military data showed the aircraft did not continue on toward Beijing. Instead, it executed an initial small turn to the right, and then a definitive sweeping left turn heading southwest. It flew directly back across the Malay Peninsula, over land.
That action just screams intentional human input. It happened within minutes of that final goodnight sign-off. And the military tracking, it also revealed altitude fluctuations during this unauthorized maneuver.
Yes. The primary radar tracked the aircraft, varying its height significantly. It was fluctuating between 31,000 and 33,000 feet. Later, as it headed out west, it dropped to a lower altitude, down to 29,500 feet.
And those changes, they're not consistent with the plane just flying normally on autopilot.
Not at all. They suggest manual control. Someone was either climbing or descending, perhaps to avoid detection, or, well, for some other purpose we can't know.
So where's the last confirmed location from the military radar?
The very last known primary radar detection was logged at 02.22 MYT. By this time, the aircraft was far out over the Andaman Sea, approximately 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang Island. It had successfully traversed the entire peninsula, and seemingly it was unnoticed by the military in time to actually intercept.
And there's a detail here that often gets overlooked in all the initial confusion. The aircraft passed incredibly close to another sovereign airspace, Indonesia, but it was missed by their air traffic control systems.
That's a critical point. The aircraft traveled near the northern tip of Sumatra, but it wasn't detected by Indonesian ATC radar.
And the reason is so simple, but devastating.
It's elementary. The plane's transponder was off. Without that active signal, civilian ATC systems have no way to identify or track the plane. It renders the aircraft essentially invisible to the entire commercial aviation world.
So this intentional disabling combined with that extreme turn, it was all happening while air traffic control was still operating under the assumption that the flight was proceeding completely normally. This led to serious, just consequential delays in the response.
The breakdown in ATC coordination was a significant failing. Ho Chi Minh ACC, in Vietnam, they noticed the plane hadn't entered their designated airspace. They first queried Kuala Lumpur ACC at 01.38 MYT.
That's 17 minutes after the transponder vanished.
17 minutes? And this initiated a chaotic and, frankly, error-prone exchange between multiple control centers.
And one of the biggest points of failure came from within the airline's own operations center, didn't it?
Yes. Kuala Lumpur ACC received incorrect information from Malaysia Airlines Operations Center. They claimed the flight was already in Cambodian airspace. This assertion caused massive confusion and misdirection for a crucial period. Phnom Penh ACC in Cambodia quickly denied the claim, but the damage was done. This cascade of misinformation resulted in a critical delay in initiating any emergency protocols.
And what was the final devastating consequence of all these delays?
The official activation of the Kuala Lumpur Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center, the ARCC.
Which is the necessary step to launch any kind of search and rescue.
It's the first official step, and it did not occur until 05.30 MYT.
That's more than 4 hours after the aircraft dropped off civilian radar.
More than 4 hours. That 4-hour window was lost forever. By then, the aircraft was already far, far out over the open Indian Ocean. The Malaysian Ministry of Transport's final report later detailed these procedural failings. It ultimately led to the resignation of the chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia. The institutional response was just profoundly inadequate.
That 4-hour delay wasn't just administrative. It meant that for the investigators, all the conventional active tracking data, all the transponder data, the voice comms, the military primary radar, it had all run out. They were forced to turn to something entirely novel, the passive technical whispers of the plane's satellite data unit. This proved to be the invisible breadcrumb trail that defied the human effort to conceal the flight.
This specific technical analysis is genuinely unprecedented in accident investigation. It marked a huge forensic victory for applied physics. The aircraft was equipped with an SDU satellite data unit. It's used for routine communication, often via a protocol called ACARS. We know the last transmission using ACARS occurred at 01.06 MYT.
Right before the turn.
Just before. And it provided a simple fuel status of 43,800 kilograms.
So the system was working perfectly fine until about the moment the plane turned back.
Yeah.
And then silence?
It went silent. Sometime between 01.07 MYT, which was that last ACARS message, and 02.25 MYT, the SATCOM system went offline. This period of silence, it aligns perfectly with the time the plane was executing its sharp turn and flying back over the peninsula, tracked only by that primary radar.
And the fact that it went offline almost certainly points to a deliberate power interruption.
It's the most likely explanation. A power cut would have also disabled the transponder and ACARS at the same time.
But the silence was broken.
Yes.
And that gave investigators the crucial timeline data they needed.
Yes. The system mysteriously rebooted. The critical moment came at 02.25 and 27 seconds MYT. This was 3 minutes after the aircraft was last detected by Malaysian military radar, when it was entirely out over the ocean. The SDU reconnected by sending what's called a logon request.
And this reboot suggests that power was restored to the satellite system after it had been cut.
Exactly. Either deliberately or maybe via a cycling of power within the aircraft systems.
And from that moment on, we started getting these hourly, what they call handshakes or pings.
That's the term. Even though the system wasn't transmitting navigation data, the SDU was programmed to respond to these hourly status requests sent from the Inmarsat ground station, which is located in Perth, Australia. These handshakes continued for the next 6 hours, and that effectively confirmed the plane was still flying and still drawing power.
Did the plane respond to any attempts to contact it after that reboot?
It didn't respond to any voice or data messages, no. But the satellite system did acknowledge 2 unanswered ground-to-aircraft phone calls, one at 02.39 MYT and a much later one at 07.13 MYT. But the most critical piece of evidence, really, is the final transmission.
The famous seventh handshake.
The 7th handshake, yes. It was a logon acknowledgement that was received at 08.100 and 0.37 MYT. Now, this signal arrived nearly an hour after Malaysia Airlines had already publicly announced the plane's loss. It confirmed the plane was still airborne and operating.
That's incredible.
After this, the system became silent again. The aircraft didn't respond to a subsequent status request that was sent at 09.15 MYT.
So what does all that mean for the total flight time?
It means the plane was operational for 7 hours and 38 minutes, well beyond its scheduled flight time to Beijing.
It's extraordinary that such minimal electronic data, these simple handshakes, allowed investigators to reconstruct a flight path across the most remote ocean on the entire planet. So how did they translate these simple electronic pings into a geographical track?
This is where the physics comes in, and it required a massive, unprecedented cooperation between accident investigators and satellite engineers. They didn't have GPS coordinates, but they leveraged 2 inherent properties of the radio signal itself.
Okay, let's break that down. The first one was the burst time offset.
The burst time offset, or BTO, yes. This is a measurement of the time it took for the signal to travel from the satellite station in Perth to the aircraft and then back again. Since radio waves travel at a known speed, the speed of light, the time delay is directly proportional to the distance. By calculating the BTO, investigators could determine the precise distance the aircraft was from the satellite at the time of each ping.
And what did that distance measurement actually give them? A specific point?
No, not a point. It gave them 7 concentric arcs. You have to imagine a massive bullseye centered on the satellite's position over the Indian Ocean. At 08.19, the plane had to be located somewhere along the circumference of that 7th arc. It couldn't tell them the direction or the speed, only the distance.
That still leaves an impossibly large area for any search. So this is where the second parameter, the burst frequency offset, provided that crucial directionality.
Correct. The burst frequency offset, or BFO, is the measurement of the Doppler shift.
Right, most people know the Doppler effect from sound, like an ambulance siren.
Exactly. The pitch is higher as it approaches you, and it's lower as it speeds away. Radio waves behave in exactly the same way. The frequency of the satellite signal changes depending on the aircraft's speed and its direction of travel relative to the satellite.
So if the plane was flying toward the satellite, the frequency would shift up, and if it was flying away, it would shift down.
Precisely. By analyzing the BFO at the time of each handshake, investigators could infer whether the aircraft was moving north or south, and roughly how fast it was going. So they combined the BTO, which gave them the distance, and the BFO, which gave them the direction and speed. And this allowed engineers to use very complex statistical modeling. It's known as Bayesian analysis.
Why was that kind of analysis necessary here?
Because they had such a limited number of data points, and each data point, each one of those arcs, was probabilistic, not definitive. Bayesian analysis is essentially a statistical method of continuously updating the probability of a hypothesis as new evidence or new data becomes available.
So they fed everything they knew into this model.
Everything. Investigators input all the known variables: the aircraft's performance limits, its fuel consumption rates, the BTO arcs, the BFO directionality. The model then outputted the most likely flight paths that matched all 7 of those handshakes.
The inference drawn from this forensic physics was undeniable. The flight was still ongoing and operating until at least 08.19 MYT.
And that led to the consensus conclusion. The aircraft crashed somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean between 08.19 and 09.15 MYT, and the cause was fuel exhaustion.
But the timing of that final partial handshake at 08.19.29, it's extremely significant in trying to understand the plane's final moments.
It really is.
Why is that exact timing and the type of request it was so suggestive?
Because the 08.19.29 signal was a logon request. It wasn't just a standard response. An SDU typically only initiates a logon request following a power interruption and then a restoration of power. This strongly suggests that a devastating mechanical sequence occurred right at that moment.
The engines flanged out.
Both engines, most likely. They flamed out from fuel exhaustion, causing an immediate, complete electrical failure.
And then the plane's final emergency mechanism would have kicked in.
The ram air turbine, the RAT. It deploys automatically in the event of a total power failure. The RAT is essentially a small propeller that pops out into the airflow, and it generates a minimal amount of emergency power. This power is reserved for crucial systems like essential flight controls and, critically for the investigation, the SDU.
So that final logon request, it's the aircraft's technical last gasp.
It is. It confirms fuel exhaustion just before all power was irrevocably lost.
And that sophisticated analysis combining probability and physics, it narrowed the most likely crash site to a region along that 7th arc, southwest of Perth, Western Australia.
So following that Inmarsat data analysis, the operational focus of the search shifted dramatically. It moved from the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca all the way to the inhospitable southern Indian Ocean. Australia took charge of coordinating this unprecedented search effort on March 17, 2014. And that signaled the start of the most expensive and complex underwater search in history.
The scale of this joint international effort involving Malaysia, Australia, China, it was just astronomical. They ended up searching 120,000 square kilometers of seafloor, and by October 2017, the total cost was estimated to have reached $155 million US.
And it started with a desperate race against time, the Pinger hunt.
Right.
That was the immediate priority between April 2nd and April 17th, 2014. They were hunting for the specific acoustic signal that's emitted by the underwater locator beacons, or ULBs, that are attached to the flight recorder.
The black boxes.
The black boxes. And the crucial constraint was the battery life of those beacons. It was expected to expire around April 7th. They were operating under just immense pressure and time constraints, covering a vast, unexplored, and mountainous ocean floor.
And that search for the pingers, it was almost certainly doomed from the start, wasn't it? Given the shocking information that came out much later.
That information was just devastating for the families and for the search teams. A 2015 report revealed that the ULB battery for the Crucial Flight Data Recorder, the FDR, it may have already expired in December 2012.
More than a year before the flight even disappeared.
More than a year. If that was true, that beacon would have been completely silent from the moment of impact, which would have rendered that entire initial focused acoustic search essentially useless.
Despite the failure to locate the main wreckage using sonar or acoustic means, physical evidence eventually emerged. And it emerged thousands of kilometers away from the main search area, finally confirming the aircraft's fate.
The discovery of marine debris was the first definitive physical proof. By October 2017, 20 pieces of debris had been recovered across the western Indian Ocean. 18 of those were confirmed by investigators as being very likely or almost certain to be from MH370.
And the first, most symbolic piece was the flaperon found on Reunion Island.
Yes, that was discovered in July 2015. It was about 4,000 kilometers west of the established search zone. French investigators confirmed the link with certainty. They leveraged serial numbers that were found on the internal components of that right-wing control surface. And this single piece, it validated the Inmarsat data. It confirmed the plane went down in the Indian Ocean.
And researchers didn't just look at the metal itself, they looked at the marine life that was attached to it.
That's right. The presence of Lipus and Atifera barnacles covering the flaperon provided a unique form of forensic data. Researchers analyzed the chemistry and the biology of these specific barnacles, and they used them as living indicators to deduce the object's drift path and the water temperatures it had passed through.
So this biological evidence helped reinforce the drift modeling.
It did. The modeling performed by the Australian Government Scientific Agency, the CSIRO, it backed up their work.
And that CSIRO drift modeling was later validated by the discovery of other debris that washed up even further down the coastline.
Absolutely. Two other highly significant pieces were found in Mozambique, about 2,000 kilometers southeast of Reunion. There was a horizontal stabilizer panel and a flap track fairing. Both were later confirmed to be almost certainly from the aircraft.
And finding these pieces in areas consistent with the predicted drift modeling,
Yeah,
that must have solidified confidence in that seventh arc crash zone.
it really did. And then later, in June 2016, an outboard flap was found on Pemba Island in Tanzania, and that was confirmed 3 months later.
Given the lack of success in the official government-led search, which was eventually suspended, private contractors stepped in with renewed efforts, driven by some pretty specialized technology.
And that brings us to Ocean Infinity. They conducted a highly publicized no-find, no-fee search back in 2018. They utilized a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, which offered much higher resolution scanning than the previous towfish sonar systems. Their initial focus was a narrowed 25,000 square kilometer area right near the location that the CSIRO had identified as the most likely impact site.
But even that technological leap didn't yield any results in 2018.
No. Despite the advanced technology, they covered an expansive area of over 112,000 square kilometers. That's well beyond their original mandate. The mission ended unsuccessfully in June 2018. The deep-sea environment just proved incredibly challenging.
And we continue to see attempts to resume this search, which really shows the persistent commitment to finding the wreckage.
There was recent authorization for Ocean Infinity to try again. They received approval to conduct a new search in 2025, covering a 15,000 square kilometer area, and again operating on a no-fee basis.
And did that get underway?
It did. The effort briefly resumed in February 2025, but disappointingly, it had to be suspended in April 2025. This was due to adverse weather and sea conditions, which they stated made it not the season to continue operations in that kind of extreme environment.
So the investigation was never solely about finding the wreck. It was about understanding the motivation behind the flight's radical diversion and breakdown in procedures. And the findings, they highlighted technical failures, massive security lapses, and, well, most chillingly, the overwhelming suggestion of deliberate, intentional human intervention.
The inquiry was led by the Malaysian Joint Investigation Team, the JIT, but with critical support from experts all over the world. The UK's AAIB, the US NTSB, France's BEA, and the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the ATSB. The core conclusion of the July 2018 Malaysian final report was stark. It said the plane was manually turned around shortly after 01.00 MYT, either by the pilot or a third party.
The report also had to address that institutional failure that allowed an unidentified aircraft to fly across a sovereign nation without any kind of intervention.
The systemic failure was profound. The report explicitly noted that the plane was missing for 20 minutes before ATC personnel were even alerted to a problem. And then you had that 4-hour delay in launching the ARCC. This lack of situational awareness and procedural paralysis was seen as a major failure of Malaysian aviation security protocols, and it directly led to the resignation of the Civil Aviation Authority chairman.
And of course, attention focused intensely on the crew, driven by the nature of how the systems were disabled. The Malaysian police investigation, it really centered on the captain.
The police formally identified Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah as the prime suspect, assuming human intervention was the cause. They clear all other crew members and passengers of any suspicious motives. This suspicion, which centers on a possible murder-suicide scenario, was really amplified by a controversial finding regarding his personal equipment.
Let's elaborate on that crucial piece of evidence. The pilot's home flight simulator.
The sources confirmed that the FBI, when they were analyzing hard drives recovered from Captain Zahari's personal flight simulator at his home, they found a planned route. This route, which had been previously deleted but was recoverable by forensic means, it closely matched the projected flight path over the southern Indian Ocean. Specifically, it showed a simulated flight that ended with fuel exhaustion deep in the remotest area of the SIO.
That detail is it's explosive. Yet the Malaysian government handled it so delicately, almost dismissively at first.
They did. They confirmed the existence of the simulator route, but initially reported that there was nothing sinister about it. This generated huge international controversy because the fact that the captain had practiced flying a very similar route to a similar ending point on his home equipment, it certainly amplified the speculation of premeditation.
It seems to strongly support the idea that the plane was diverted deliberately.
It does. It backs the theory that someone was actively trying to conceal the plane's position and heading.
Which ties right back to the manual disabling of the communication systems in the first place.
Absolutely. The timing of the transponder and ACARS going offline between that last ACARS message at 01.07 MYT and the SDU reboot at 02.25 MYT, it indicates a window where the data transmission systems were deliberately shut down. The Malaysian Prime Minister at the time, Najib Razak, publicly confirmed this finding. He stated that the systems were turned off deliberately by a person trying to mask the plane's movements. This act of concealment is really the primary evidence suggesting a hostile, intentional act.
Okay, so moving away from the active, controlled suicide theory, investigators also had to consider a catastrophic event that left the crew incapacitated, meaning the plane just flew itself until the end.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the ATSB, initially concluded that the unresponsive crew, or hypoxia theory, best fit the available evidence. That was for the long 5-hour period over the Indian Ocean. In this scenario, perhaps following a technical failure or rapid decompression, the pilots and passengers could have been incapacitated by oxygen deprivation or hypoxia.
And the plane would just continue flying straight on autopilot.
Exactly, following the flight management system until it simply ran out of fuel.
Does the physical wreckage that we have support the theory of an incapacitated crew or a high-speed plunge, as opposed to, say, a gentle, controlled ditching?
It does. The analysis of the recovered debris, particularly that outboard flap found on Pemba Island, it provided vital clues about the plane's final configuration. Analysis showed that the landing flaps were not extended at the time of impact.
Which is critical.
It's critical. If a pilot were attempting a controlled water landing, hatching, they would almost certainly deploy the flaps to reduce speed and increase lift. The lack of flap deployment supports the scenario that the aircraft was uncontrolled when it ran out of fuel, leading to a high-speed spiral dive and a catastrophic impact. And that holds true whether the pilot was incapacitated or actively trying to crash the plane.
The investigation had to be exhaustive, though. They had to review all possibilities, including theories that centered on the cargo or non-crew passengers.
Of course. Initial suspicion, it naturally fell on 2 Iranian passengers who boarded using stolen Austrian and Italian passports. This immediately raised terrorism flags.
Right.
However, investigators swiftly eliminated them as suspects once their backgrounds were reviewed. They were found to be asylum seekers who were just trying to enter Europe, not agents of an attack.
And what about the cargo? We often hear about specific items on board being potential ignition sources.
The manifest was heavily scrutinized. The cargo included 4,566 kilograms of mangosteens, an exotic fruit that was quickly cleared of suspicion after they interviewed the handlers. But critically, there were 221 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries, part of a consignment from Motorola Solutions.
And lithium-ion batteries are known to be a serious fire danger.
Yeah, they are if they're improperly handled or if they experience what's called thermal runaway. Investigators had to consider if an uncontained cargo fire could have caused the incapacitation of the crew or perhaps force the manual diversion in the first place. While the official conclusion favors human intervention for the turnaround, a cargo fire remains a possible initiating factor for the crew incapacitation that would lead to that hypoxia theory.
Now, a full decade later, we have new analysis, and it's questioning the very acoustic data that investigators relied upon. It's potentially casting doubt on the established crash location. This is based on 2024 analysis of hydrophone data.
This is a significant development. Researchers at Cardiff University, led by Usama Qadri, they conducted a detailed analysis of underwater hydrophone data. These are acoustic listening stations in the Indian Ocean. They were looking for the expected pressure signature from a large object, like a Boeing 777, impacting the water at high speed.
And what was their finding in relation to the established search area?
They found a conflict. The hydrophone data that was captured near the official search location along the 7th arc, it identified only a single, relatively weak signal that might have corresponded to a crash. The signature is far, far too small and weak compared to the clear pressure signals that would be expected from the catastrophic high-speed impact of a 230-ton aircraft.
Wait, so this 2024 analysis fundamentally suggests the entire multi-million-dollar search was based on a flawed assumption about where and when the plane hit. That's a massive implication.
It raises profound questions. Kadri stated that it is, and I quote, implausible to imagine that a significant crash of an aircraft on the ocean surface would fail to generate a discernible pressure signature. If this analysis holds, it means one of two things must be true. Either the aircraft crashed outside the current search zone, or the timing derived from the Inmarsat data, which suggested the crash happened between 08.19 and 09.15 MYT, is incorrect. It forces investigators to reassess the entire currently established impact timeframe or the entire location of the crash zone.
The aftermath of the MH370 disappearance was characterized by immense public scrutiny and intense criticism directed at the involved authorities, particularly in Malaysia, for what was perceived as a very opaque and mismanaged response.
The initial days were just plagued by massive confusion and the persistent release of contradictory information. The media and the public, they received conflicting times for the last contact, confusion over the number of stolen passports, and the slow, reluctant acknowledgement that the military radar had, in fact, tracked the aircraft flying back across the peninsula.
The Royal Malaysian Air Force faced some very heavy scrutiny for what was seen as a massive security lapse, failing to intercept that unidentified aircraft.
It was a serious breach. The RMAF was criticized for their failure to scramble jets to identify the aircraft as it flew back across Malaysian airspace. This was a missed security opportunity to track the aircraft before it reached the vast open ocean.
What was their defense?
RMAF officials defended the failure by stating that, in a peacetime context, the unidentified blip on their radar was deemed to be a commercial aircraft and not a hostile threat, which made interception protocols unnecessary.
That defense, however, did little to soothe the outrage over the security failure.
No, it did not.
And the necessary international collaboration that was needed to understand the flight path that was initially hindered by geopolitical concerns.
Yes, the early days of the investigation saw a reluctance by several countries, including Malaysia, to share their raw military radar data. Defense experts noted that releasing this sensitive information would reveal their technical capabilities, potentially compromising national security intelligence. This reluctance meant the crucial military data needed to confirm the plane's exact turnaround point wasn't immediately available to the international civilian investigation team. It just exacerbated the difficulty of tracking the aircraft right after its transponder was disabled.
Despite the staggering cost and the devastating human loss, the disappearance did force the global air transport industry and regulatory bodies to implement sweeping, essential safety changes to prevent a recurrence. This is really the enduring legacy of MH370.
The regulatory shift was immediate and profound. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, was compelled to adopt entirely new standards, specifically addressing the tracking of aircraft over remote ocean areas.
What were the immediate changes that were implemented?
By November 2018, ICAO required that all commercial aircraft operating over open ocean must report their position every 15 minutes. This was designed specifically to eliminate the possibility of a plane disappearing for hours without a confirmed last location.
And the mandates became even stricter for newer planes entering service.
Yes. For aircraft manufactured after January 2021, the rules are significantly more stringent. These new aircraft must incorporate autonomous tracking devices that are capable of sending out location information at least once every minute whenever the aircraft is deemed to be in a distress condition.
The satellite provider, Inmarsat, they also made a change, right?
They did. Inmarsat proactively changed its system, reducing the time interval for its routine system handshakes with aircraft terminals from 1 hour down to 15 minutes. It just adds an extra layer of passive tracking resilience.
The tragedy also exposed a critical limitation that had been overlooked for years: the weakness of the existing flight recorder technology.
The primary weakness was the short 30 to 40-day battery life of the underwater locator beacons, the ULBs, that are attached to the black boxes. This had been an issue raised after the loss of Air France Flight 447 over the Atlantic in 2009, but it wasn't comprehensively addressed until MH370's battery life issue became so critical in the search effort.
So what specific changes were mandated for the flight recorders themselves?
The European Aviation Safety Agency, ESA, they increased the required ULB transmitting time from 30 days up to 90 days. That standard was implemented by 2020. ICAO also mandated that for aircraft manufactured after 2020, the cockpit voice recorders, the CVRs, they must record at least 25 hours of data. That's a massive increase from the previous standard of only 2 hours. It ensures all critical phases of long flights are captured.
And they finally addressed the long-standing risk of the recorders just sinking deep into the ocean and becoming completely unrecoverable.
That issue led to mandates for innovation. New aircraft designs approved after 2020 must incorporate a means of recovering the flight recorders or the vital data they contain before they sink. This provision is flexible. It allows for either robust data streaming directly to the ground in the event of an anomaly, or the incorporation of physical ejectable recorders, which are designed to automatically deploy and float on the water surface after an impact. It just makes recovery much simpler.
Beyond the regulatory shifts, Malaysia Airlines faced immense, perhaps insurmountable financial challenges in the wake of the disappearance.
The airline was already facing struggles, and the financial toll was exacerbated not only by the cost and the reputation damage of MH370, but also by the tragic downing of Flight 17 just 4 months later over Ukraine. Ticket sales dropped dramatically, especially from the crucial Chinese market. The resulting losses spiked, and that ultimately necessitated the airline's renationalization by the end of 2014 to prevent its complete financial collapse.
And finally, how did the financial situation affect the victims' families, specifically regarding compensation?
Under the international rules of the Montreal Convention, families were automatically entitled to an initial payment of about $175,000 per passenger, regardless of where fault lay. However, accessing full compensation claims faced procedural hurdles until the Malaysian government formally declared the disappearance an accident in January 2015. This was a necessary legal classification to facilitate the insurance payouts and finalize the compensation proceedings for the families.
This remains a defining moment in aviation history, a confluence of, it seems, intentional human action, technological limitations, and massive systemic failure.
We've analyzed the critical evidence, the inexplicable manual deviation from the planned course, the limited but brilliant forensic evidence provided by the satellite data, the unprecedented global effort to find the wreckage, and the persistent conflict between the hypoxia theory and the deliberate murder-suicide scenario. A conflict now complicated by the latest acoustic data suggesting the crash site may still be misidentified.
The source material really paints a complex picture of deliberate concealment versus a passive loss of control.
The ongoing mystery of MH370 is a permanent, painful testament. It conclusively demonstrated that even when the air is saturated with sophisticated 21st century tracking technology, determined and deliberate human action intended to hide an aircraft's position can still bypass basic safety redundancies. This entire event proved that the evolution of aviation technology must prioritize not just recovery from accidental failures, but the immediate anticipation and negation of systems being deliberately disabled.
A deeply unsettling thought to end this exploration on. Thank you for walking us through the evidence and the implications of this aviation tragedy.
It was necessary to cover this material in detail.
Thanks for listening.